A 13.6% tax increase, property tax increase proposed for Campbell River taxpayers has put City Hall on the public agenda like I don't think we have seen in this town in years. Some people think that's a good idea. Some people aren't so sure about that. Welcome to FaceTime. I'm Dan MacLennan. My guest today, none other than Bill Matthews, former city councillor, former finance chair for goodness knows how many years, and political pundit extraordinaire. Thank you. Thank you for joining us in the studio.
You're more than welcome, Dan.
Haven't seen you in a while.
Mm-hmm.
You, I'm sure, like many others, have been watching what's going on at City Hall with maybe an increased interest, more so than most of us have watched generally in past years. It's one of those things, of course, you've been right involved in it from the inside, but generally speaking, people view City Hall as something, it's there, but they prefer to work on other things, and the only time it really cracks the horizon is when maybe City Hall does something they don't like. That's happened in a bigger way now than I think I've seen in all my time here in Campbell River. Just the mere mention of 13.6 sets blood boiling in this town. But there's an awful lot of background involved in all of this. So let me just start with, what are you hearing? I'm sure, like me, you're hearing both sides, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground.
No, you're right, Dan. It's interesting. As you know, I was involved for many years, and the only time I can recollect that we came even close to this, and you will very well remember, was the Walmart property situation down near the estuary by the old Quinsam Hotel, and that got to flag waving and phone calls and groups getting together and liaisons here and there and everywhere. So this is definitely up there in that category as far as people getting excited as to what City Hall is doing. You're right. There's a lot of background. I personally have told a lot of people over the last 2 or 3 years since I've been involved, they said, you know, as you know, we've always had a policy, council always had a policy of trying to reduce the major tax, because we knew there was going to be a day when the Gold River situation was going to be upon us. Well, we didn't know, but it was very evident that eventually there was going to be great downsizing and so on and so forth. So we tried to alleviate that to the extent we did. And thank goodness we did it to the extent we did, or it would have been a lot worse. But once it hit us and everything really hit the fan, then I'd always said all along that the years 2011, 12, and 13 were going to be the worst years we were going to see, and watch out. And everybody only likes to seem to focus on what's happening now as far as City Hall is concerned. They don't want to know about the future. And as you so properly said, City Hall runs along and everything's fine until there's a controversy that really affects everybody, and then boom, you're done. The figure 13.6 is very scary, even for myself, now retired, and you know, looking at your income and your expenses and so on, as everybody is. In a way, it's too bad. It sort of seemed to come about quite quickly, for one thing, and I wasn't here when it was first announced. I'd read it on websites and so on. But it didn't seem to, if I would have been on council and it didn't get pushed as much as I thought it should have been, that it's really 7.1%. I mean, you can, that's, you know, because you're reducing fees and you're doing that sort of thing. So it's basically 7.1%. I think if that had been the point, you could have said there's going to be a 7.1% tax increase, which includes a 13% increase with some reduction in fees, you might have got a tremendous, you might have got a lot less vociferous backlash as you did. So that's one part of it. The other part of it, of course, which is upsetting to me as a previously elected official for, some people say, way too many years, that you make decisions on council. You take a council, and this has been said in lots of articles, you make a decision, and a lot of times you aren't happy with that decision. Right. But it's a democratic decision made by duly elected democratic people, right, in a democratic way. And once that decision is there, you make it work. In my mind, you carry on with that decision. It's made, so you have to work within the means. And then you go to work to try and rectify it in whatever ways you can or alleviate certain situations. So I wasn't very pleased with that part of the situation, in that an elected official, in this case being the mayor, who I do not know personally, and I think everybody knows that I worked for Roy Grant on his campaign, and there was no sour grapes involved in this at all. I just don't think he handled himself as a leader of our people with a decision having been made, you know, a properly voted upon decision. I disagree personally with that part of it.
Have you ever seen the like of a mayor calling for a tax revolt?
Never.
Like, get out there, you're being screwed, get out there and make some noise.
I've never, I've been in what we call closed meetings, in-camera meetings, where a decision hasn't gone the way of a mayor or myself or some other councillor, and you go in there and you say, geez, you guys, what did you do? Like, well, how could you do that? But once that decision is made, you go out and you live with that decision. You may try and alter it in other ways as time goes on, but my feeling is if you need the respect of the people you're working with sitting around a table, and you get pretty intimate over 3 years. I mean, you're spending a tremendous amount of time making huge decisions for 30,000 people, right? That you need the respect for each other. And in my personal opinion, the way that our mayor went about that is not going to incite respect from his fellow councillors, in my mind.
Our streeter team, once again, has been out beating the bushes around Campbell River, and we didn't have any difficulty, I think it's safe to say, finding opinions on a 13% tax increase. So that's what we went out. We asked people what they thought of the mayor and his tax revolt and this 13.6% tax increase. Let's have a look at some of those comments.
Well, the mayor knows what he's doing more than most. He should, and yeah, I don't think it should be as high as it is. And I understand that the pulp mill's gone now, and the Campbell River definitely needs to do something. But I believe there's other ways we can find the money.
I think he had a very good point, because I think it's too easy to just say, pull out another credit card and start using taxpayers' money when there's a lot of areas here that probably could be, you know, slimmed off. And I liked a lot of his ideas of taking a second look at how we're spending our money. I disagree with a zero increase, because I think we all have to pay a bit of a price to get back on our feet. I disagree with they're saying with the 13% increase, because I think it's too much for a lot of people. Because what will happen is many seniors will just say, well, I'll just defer my taxes now because I can do it. Well, that defeats the purpose, because then you don't have a tax base to work on.
I think it's too much, but I don't own any property anymore, so, but it is way too high.
I was on the regional board way back in the 70s and involved in a referendum that was never held because there was too many people wanted to spend money they didn't have. And I'm just conservative. When I had to give a speech in a public meeting concerning this referendum, my statement was to the audience there, you can have anything you want as long as you can pay for it. And that is still the reality. And I think we get carried away at times. People want things and they want somebody else to help pay for it. I'm opposed to that. It doesn't work.
I think it's ridiculous. I think, well, people need to pay their taxes, and the mayor should be behind the council, not. I think it's ridiculous that he wants this revolt. It's just absolutely childish as far as I'm concerned. Grow up.
No punches pulled there. Wow. As you see, of course, quite a spectrum of opinion. What about this this pervasive attitude or this impression we get that we're simply, we're like too many individuals, we're spending beyond our means, we're not keeping track, and that our wants are greater than our ability to pay for them, and so we have to have big tax increases because we don't know how to simplify and cut back.
Well, as you say, Dan, there's a lot of background. Even a comment of one of the gentlemen on there said, people are now deferring their taxes so we don't have the tax base. Well, that's not the fact. The fact is, if you defer your taxes, the province, you basically are borrowing money from the province, and the province is giving the tax money to Campbell River, so you're not losing a tax base. And that was put in for elders, if you remember, in Vancouver, whose house prices went so high they couldn't afford the taxes, so they could defer them until they either sold the home or until they passed away. And that is done now. I actually do it myself. I feel I mean, you know, it's going to go to my estate eventually anyway, and so that's a choice you have, but it doesn't affect the tax base. There is so much that goes into the budgets. I have lots of very vocal friends, and you know quite a few of them, who I have been having these debates with for decades now. And there are situations where there can be savings, but let's face it, it's all based on the level of service you expect as a citizen. Nearly everything is effective as a citizen on your level of service. I read yesterday in your paper, Campbellton First had come to council and asked for some money, and then they came again and they wanted some work done. Well, there's no staff people to do that work. So here we go. Now, if we'd have had somebody who's probably would have been there in a position to do things like that is not there anymore, because the staff levels have had to be reduced, and they have been reduced over the years. So that's just one example. A lot of the other examples are, and I keep reading in the paper, the all-weather field, which now isn't going to go ahead anyway, but people don't have this is the problem, people get concerned, but they don't have the education of what's really going on. There's so many examples, as you know, of money coming out of reserve funds. It can only be spent for those specific items, and those are basically capital items. So when we talk about the riprap proposal to save the riprap for $60,000, I would assume that is, we have reserve funds for parks and recreation stuff and so on, and that's where that money will come from. That's a fund that is there for those specific reasons. The same as a sewer fund, the same as a water fund, and all these things. The roof for the Spirit Square, I understand.
That's another hot button.
That's another hot button, but I understand there is monies left over from the grant from the province, that money is in place to build that roof, and it's only a roof that's going over the stage part, is my understanding, because I had no awareness. And there's money in that fund left over, and it can only be spent for the Spirit Square anyway. So, you know, a lot of people just don't have the education to know that. I'm still not saying maybe it's right or wrong to spend it, but if you don't spend it, you can't just say, okay, well, that's going to go and buy some more plants for downtown to make it look nice in the summer. You can't do that.
I'll never claim to understand all the ins and outs of finance at City Hall, and I think what we get now is, aside from this unprecedented call from the mayor, we have, and it's probably a very healthy thing, this concept of what do we need in the way of services? Do we really need to do all the things that we've come to expect? Do we need all the communities in bloom? Do we need all the snowplow equipment? Do we need all of these things? There's a certain contingent seem to say, I don't care how you spend your money at City Hall. If you don't have it, don't come to me for it. Just put some things on the shelf. And that seems to be where we've got now, and they're two very differing opinions. There are those who certainly want to maintain services, and there are those saying, well, we have to cut them at all costs in order to simply balance the books. We had quite an interesting council meeting just the other night, a little over an hour's worth of presentations, 22 speakers in total. We've got a couple of them here for you, just to give you a bit of an idea. There was one comment in favor of the tax increase, and then we'll wrap it up with one of the final speakers of the night.
I'm here to support the tax increase. I believe I came here in 1992. I love Campbell River. I'm not going to move. I'm on a fixed income. I'm a pensioner. My husband is about to be a pensioner, and we have adjusted our budget. I cannot see me not using the shovel to clean the driveway. I can't see Campbell River not having the snow plows to get rid of the snow. I think we need to keep the services we already have, and I applaud the councillors who support the tax increase. Thank you.
Thank you.
The current budget is largely financially irresponsible. Whether it's 13.8% or 7-point-something% or 38 cents per day is absolutely irrelevant, and discussion of that detail masks the larger problem, which is that there's a huge hidden tax and an enormous future year tax risk. This comes from taking large amounts of money from contingencies at a time when those monies are needed the most and when they cannot be replenished. Therefore, regardless of whether you are in the camp of 3 or 4, you cannot accept this budget. And in closing, I would implore you to reconsider, and in so doing, remember that in a civil society, our responsibility, your responsibility to the less fortunate must always be more than your responsibility towards the more fortunate. And it is this philosophy, and not parks or pavements or fancy slogans, that will define this community. And so I think it is with this issue at this point in time when this council will either rise to the challenge and maybe even become a great council, or when collectively you will fail us. I said at the beginning that I thought each of you were doing his or her best, and I stand by that. But it's been my experience that when people work with each other, their best is much, much better than when they work against each other. Thank you for your time.
That was a theme we saw come up again and again last night, even though a lot of it was, my taxes are too high, you're killing me. There was also, get your act together, council. Stop fighting. We want to see leadership, and we want to see, if not unanimity, we want to see strong direction. And that gentleman there, earlier in his presentation, was saying this council cannot afford to move forward as the 4 and the 3, which is the way all of these votes, or many of these votes, have broken down. You cannot afford to take that much acrimony and disagreement forward into a term that is just getting started and expect to get leadership and to get consensus and direction. And his point was essentially, you guys have to start afresh, and you have to try and come at this from a unified approach. Maybe it's not going to be consensus, but 4-3 is not going to convince either side that we're doing the right thing. Are you concerned with the recipe that we've set up here? As you know, it was just a few months ago we elected this bunch. There's a 3-year term here, and it looks like they're at each other's throats now.
Well, it's nice to be retired from the business. Let me first state that. But I agree. A 4-3 vote can be a healthy situation. But in this particular situation, it's not a healthy situation. And I think, I go back to my statement about the mayor. I think if the mayor had accepted the 4-3 vote and had said, okay, I'm in disagreement with this, but obviously it's the wish of council and we have to move forward and try and resolve the future and keep together as a team. But by going out and saying what he did, he not only riled the people, but he planted these seeds of discontent and disharmony in the council, in my mind, in some of these people that voted the 4-3. And my understanding is Councillor Adams, who is a very astute financial person, my understanding was that he had another alternative that didn't seem to want to get, either didn't get to the floor. I wasn't part of that. I didn't read any part of that. Otherwise, I don't. I know Andy personally well enough that he wasn't going to vote for. I mean, there was no way he could do a 0% tax increase or anywhere near that. The other thing, because I was away, I don't really understand. I imagine these lines were drawn fairly early in the conversation during financial meetings that may have been held behind closed doors or may not, depending whether it was personnel issues and so on and so forth. So maybe those lines were drawn, and if they were, in past experience, if I was one of the three that didn't agree, I would try and come up with a plan. I learned the word compromise a tremendous amount. When I was younger, I wasn't compromising with anybody, but you learn to compromise. And I would have tried personally to come to a compromise where we could have got, even if it was a split, it would have kept the harmony of council together, Dan. That's what scares me, because the people on the street are saying, what's going on? There's people all over the island talking about it, saying, what's going on with that bunch in Campbell River? I mean, you know, they make a decision and then there's a revolt against the decision, and it's a democratic decision. They can't get their heads around it. So it's very, very, very tough. I mean, we all love this town. We're, like the lady said, nobody's going to leave. I'm not going to leave Campbell River, that's for sure. And I hope we can overcome it, but that it has to be a team. You have to have respect for the mayor. You have to have respect for each other as councils, because you make a tremendous number of decisions that are important for the future of our city.
And like you were saying, it appears, and maybe this is, we can move this into a discussion on process now. It appears as though that entrenchment happened early on in the process. People either painted themselves into corners or, you know, stated their position so strongly that they did not feel able to move out of those. Now, you sat through countless budget processes, and I used to refer to them as decision by exhaustion. Yes. Because traditionally, when it came down to 1 week, usually 3 or 4 days, where everybody gathered in council chambers, all the department heads, all the politicians, and you sat there and simply ground it out. And by the end of the third day, people were really starting to get a little bit tired and cranky. And you were always, invariably, you're a little bit behind the timeline that you thought you'd like to be done by now, but we're going to have to extend this into Friday morning. Or had a lot of this happen, but what happened was, as time grew short, the compromises grew. You know, the deals started to happen. People started to, you know, just to get us out of here, you know, okay, I'll say uncle on that one, and if I give that up, will you help me with this? And it seemed there was an environment there created, certainly not comfortable for those in the gun sites, but it helped to produce some results. This year, we never went through that. We did a finance committee meeting, and then we had a council meeting, and then a couple weeks later, we'd do a finance committee meeting. It seemed very orderly. But I don't know, to me it felt like it's too orderly. There's, even though people will be unhappy with the big tax increase, I mean, there's enough pressure there. It didn't feel as though sitting around that council chambers that there was that, we've got to get this thing hammered out right like now. Nobody leaves the room until we're there. And maybe that made a difference.
Well, I think it goes back. I think one of the main reasons, 40% of whatever 3 out of 7 is, nearly half the people are new, right? I mean, you've got a mayor who's never been involved in this process on a public basis, and there's no comparison between a private company and a city. I don't care what anybody says. I've been involved in both, and there's it's an animal completely unto itself. Now, you've got 2 councillors who, one of them topped the poll, being a new councillor, and Larry and Ron did very well. I mean, they've both had businesses, they've been in they know finances a little bit, but this is a whole different animal, and they're thrown into this excruciating situation where, my God, you know, because you hit it right on the head. Years and years ago, everybody sort of had their pet projects. You know, everybody has a pet project.
Exactly.
So they come up to council and you'd realize you were still a little short. And I can remember many times breaking for lunch for half an hour and being in the lunchroom and more sort of little, not deals being made, but compromises being given, saying, well, okay, Morgan, you know, I'll give you a couple more gardens if you'll let me have another half a playground or whatever. You know,
there had to be room for wheeling and dealing.
But see here, nobody really knew. I mean, there were the 4 people who had been there, and I would think if you look back at their voting record, it was aligned a lot of the time in the previous 3 years. Those 4 councillors was really aligned. The one that fell off the rails in this decision was Andy, but Claire and Ryan and Mary were pretty well aligned that whole time, and Roy was with them too on that, right? So there was quite an alignment. Now you've got these brand new people there in these decisions, not really knowing the procedure, so that maybe made it look like it was more stifled in that there wasn't as much open discussion and so on and so forth. And of course, as we say, they were thrown into this horrendous decision that we knew, and that was why I was quite upset during the election campaign. It's very easy for somebody who hasn't run again to say we can do this and we can do that, but anybody who had studied the books or gone up there or looked at anything knew there was no way you were going to do a 0% tax increase. There was absolutely no possible way when you already, you had union contracts that were coming up, you had inflation figures,
shortfall from the mill.
Shortfall from the mill, which is huge, huge, huge.
Exactly.
So it was a little different situation this year, and this is what I'm hoping. I mean, we've got this council for 3 years. For God's sake, let's let them get on the right track and get on with it, because we all want it to work out. And maybe there could have been a bit of difference. Maybe we could have gone 10% this year and 10% next year. Maybe we have to go 10% again next year. Who knows what the situation is going to be? But I do believe I still believe in all the years I've been on, there is a tremendous vocal minority out there. There has always been a silent majority, and there's always been a lot of people who will never open their mouths to say anything. Unless you get them one-on-one, they'll tell you, right?
Just a bit of time left, but there's been political maneuvering here. When the Finance Committee voted 4-3 in favor of the 13.6, Mayor Jakeway turned around and said, okay, we should have a public forum and let people air their opinions. And essentially, 4 of the 7 voted down a public forum, which didn't look good. Now we go through 2 council meetings where we've got speakers lined up, we've got the gallery packed full of people. As we were saying, over an hour's worth of presentations at the last meeting. Now that that's passed, we have a special meeting coming up to give first 3 readings to the budget bylaw. And the motion came up at the council meeting earlier this week. We've heard enough public presentations. The time for public delegations is past. So at the meeting where we're going to debate and vote on first 3 readings, we're not going to allow public delegations. Is that a little dangerous?
Was it a unanimous vote of council?
No, it was another 4-3.
It was another 4-3 vote. Well, you know, Dan, first of all, and I'm not protecting the 4, or I'm not siding with the 4 that are on the positive on the budget side of this. You advertise in your paper, the other paper advertises. There are budget meetings. You can come and you can sit in the budget meetings, and you can make presentations in the budget meetings. One of the people came out and said something. We've gone through a year process of amending the community plan. 1,500 people came out to the community plan. The community plan dictates a lot of what goes into the budget by what the priority of people want. Right. There are times that people can get involved. The problem is most of these people just are too busy with their lives. They don't, as you say, don't really want anything to do with City Hall until it hits the fan. And by then, part of the process of where they could have input is just about done. But I still think, let them still have their say.
Well, and I think we've covered most of the topics here. There's an awful lot more to do on this. I will hope you will join us in future as one of our established pundits here at FaceTime, because there's certainly a lot more to talk about, even once this budget is settled, if and when that day comes. My guest on FaceTime has been Bill Matthews, former finance chairman, longtime city finance councillor, election manager for Roy Grant in the last campaign.
Freeman of the city. I'm so proud of him.
Excuse me for not even bringing that up.
That's quite all right.
Now, a little bit of business we got to take care of. We'd like to hear what you think about the show, of course, and here's how you get a hold of us. You can like us. Please like us on Facebook. It's at www.facebook.com/FaceTime/FaceTime4U, the number 4, or you can email us at facetime@shaw.ca. Best ways to get a hold of us. And so ends FaceTime number 7 with Bill Matthews. I'm Dan MacLennan. Join us next time for a special edition of FaceTime with Campbell River Food Bank President Lynn Nash. Thanks for joining us.